And I was just wondering whether you could talk about this kind of disease that we have surrounding, our need for incessant growth.
What I tried to do in How Soon Is Now is really understand our whole situation from a comprehensive system design perspective.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, I think a very productive way of looking at corporations is almost like artificial life forms, or so artificial organisms, artificial life forms that we created that are kind of made of, innovation, ideas, legal code, financial data, insignias, graphic design. And we take these artificial life forms and we tell them that they have to survive in a game that we created called the stock market. And we said there's only one rule in this game. And if you want to survive or thrive, you have to maximize financial value or shareholder value.
Yeah.
So a corporation as an artificial life form, whatever its area of endeavor is, then has to do that primarily. So by making that the one rule of the game, we basically fucked ourselves, because we basically ensure that corporations are going to act anti-ecologically. So they're going to have to, go against, subvert environmental restrictions like British Petroleum did in the Gulf of Mexico. They're going to have to corrupt governments and buy lobbyists and buy influence. They're going to have to self-select for sociopathic character types, because they want people running those things, to maximize financial value, and therefore you can't really care about the integrity of local communities. If you're going to put another Walmart, another Starbucks in a neighborhood, you just have to keep propagating that financial model.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to drill for oil, you can't care about the fact that it destroys, the local tribe that's been living there for thousands of years. So unfortunately, it's a suicide model, and ultimately we have to address it from a design infrastructure perspective.
Yeah.
So, for instance, the rules of whatever emerges after this thing crashes and burns, if we're going to survive as a species, will be like, corporations or whatever they then evolve into will have to, think about and care for, the health and integrity of local communities, the biodiversity of local ecosystems, the health of local ecosystems, and those will have to be built into the success of the game. Rather than it just being about maximizing financial value. I mean, unfortunately, money as we now have it is inherently destructive as a tool. I mean, governments, measure themselves according to the GDP, or gross domestic product.
Yeah.
It's simply a measurement of all the transactions, economic exchanges that are going on. So if you're a forest and you're just sitting there with birds chirping and water running through you, you're not really creating a lot of financial transactions. But if they can, cut you down, take all the logs, sell the logs, turn you into toxic waste dump, build a strip mall on top of you.
That adds to the GDP.
Exactly. So that's the logic of the system that we've created. Yeah. And it's supported by a whole system of, what you could talk about as the media as a system that manufactures the kinds of subjectivity or the type of consciousness that's needed for such a system to function. So people who are convinced that their short-term desires, the false needs that the advertisers sell to them is what they have to take.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna, make it as a species on the planet, we're gonna have to figure out a whole different, way of handling ourselves.
It's a shame.
Yeah. Well, we were talking before about a vision. And in a way that the society we have now, I mean, you could say, it's hard to define it. We could say consumer society, capitalist, post-industrial civilization. And, maybe we need to look beyond that, because, this model of growth and progress seems to be inherently destructive to nature and local communities. So, a model that other, a number of people are now discussing or kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying this would be a good model is a regenerative culture.
Yeah.
Rather than sustainability, because the word sustainable really means like being on life support or something, or like maybe your breathing is just being sustained but you're otherwise cadaverous. So the idea of regenerative is much more how natural systems function. They're constantly restoring, creating new mutations, thriving, replenishing, and it's a model, it's an ideal for what we could do technologically. If, for instance, we had cradle-to-cradle manufacturing, if all of our throughputs fed back productively into the natural world, if we were able to design our products not so cheaply so that every component could be recycled, so that rare minerals and metals could be recycled.
I know that you do the odd talk and seminar with Charles Eisenstein as well, don't you? And do you have one coming up, or you've just done one quite recently, I think, haven't you?
We did one about 3 or 4 months ago, and actually, I appreciate Charles's work, and in fact, I edited his book, Sacred Economics, but I was a little bit dumbfounded by some of his positions, and I felt actually we had some areas of disagreement. I felt that his kind of vision of human nature, to me, seems a little bit naive, almost Pollyannish, where I think, we do have to reckon with the fact that, there are sociopaths. There are people who almost need to be quarantined, or, given some outlier position if you don't want to perpetuate violence and cruelty.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wonder, since you kind of brought that up, I suppose, Trump represents our sort of collective shadow in a way. And I suppose, so that's all that's kind of playing out at the moment, isn't it? For I suppose it's bringing up that shadow aspect in all of us, and that would be I suppose a kind of, sorry, a bit garbled there. I'll edit that out.
That wasn't garbled.
It was. It sounded so. No, I was just trying to lead into, I suppose, bringing in this idea of the collective shadow, that perhaps that Trump in a way is doing us all a favour by representing that on some sort of soul level, if you like, almost, that he actually is doing us acting as a sort of catalyst for change, and that in fact it's interesting that that we have him at that. At this time, and that perhaps it is the necessary kind of grit in the oyster that's going to create something from this, because we're almost defining ourselves by what we aren't, and he allows us to do that, to actually kind of have a reaction, as opposed to.
Well, another great example in the U.S. right now is what's happening with Harvey Weinstein, who was a liberal film producer at Miramax. Very powerful guy. I'd actually heard years ago about his, from actresses and so on, about his behavior. Yeah. So it was, totally common knowledge throughout the whole industry and beyond. And it was only maybe because his power was starting to wane that it erupted like this. But I think it's turning out to be a huge cultural watershed where many women are now coming forward to speak out. And many men also, the danger is that it could become something like a witch hunt. Yeah. But the positive prospect is that it could be kind of like
cathartic.
Yeah, what's that?
Cathartic in a way, I suppose.
Yeah, and it may be something that's really going to shift, like that. And I still think many segments of society, are thinking and behaving like that. But at least now, this kind of liberal elite bubble is popping, and maybe we're going to move into a different type of sexual communication culture where it really is about informed consent and really conscious participation, enthusiastic conscious participation, before people do things that they regret.